Part 4. You will hear a lecturer discussing the social history and evolution of the pocket. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. Today, we are going to look at the history of a very humble, yet surprisingly controversial everyday object, the pocket. While we often take pockets for granted as a standard feature of our clothing, their evolution reveals a fascinating story about gender, privacy, and social change. If we go back to the medieval era, the concept of a pocket, as we know it, an internal pouch sewn into a garment, didn't really exist. Instead, both men and women carried their personal belongings in small bags or pouches. These weren't attached to the clothes but were tied with string and hung from a belt around the waist. Because these pouches were worn on the outside of the clothing, the contents were easily accessible to the owner, but unfortunately, they were also accessible to others. This external placement made city dwellers easy targets for thieves and pickpockets, which is actually where the term pickpocket originated. As we moved into the 17th century, the design of clothing began to diverge sharply along gender lines, and this included the evolution of the pocket. For men, the pouch was eventually integrated directly into the clothing. It was sewn into the lining of coats and breeches. This was a revolutionary change that allowed men to carry items secretly and securely. Women, however, were not given this same convenience. Instead of sewn-in pockets, women utilized what were known as tie-on pockets. These were essentially large, removable sacks tied around the waist, but crucially, they were worn underneath their petticoats. To access them, a woman had to reach through a slit in her overskirt. While this might sound cumbersome, these hidden pockets were actually incredibly spacious. Historical records show women carrying an astonishing array of items in them, from sewing kits and keys to snacks and even small bottles of gin. However, a major shift occurred towards the end of the 18th century, influenced heavily by the French Revolution. Fashion became more egalitarian but also much more restrictive for women. The voluminous skirts of the past were replaced by the empire line style. These dresses were high-waisted and fell straight down, creating a very slender silhouette. Because these new dresses sat so close to the body, there was simply no room underneath for bulky tie-on pockets. Consequently, women were forced to abandon their hidden storage. To replace the pocket, the fashion industry introduced small, decorative bags called reticules, the ancestors of modern handbags. Unlike the secure, hidden pocket, the reticule had to be carried in the hand. This subtle change had a profound social impact. It meant women's hands were occupied, literally restricting their ability to do other things. This leads us to the political symbolism of the pocket. Historians often argue that for women, the loss of the pocket was a loss of autonomy. The internal pocket had provided a secret, secure place for personal property, a zone of independence that was hidden from the eyes of husbands and fathers. By the late 19th century, the lack of pockets became a focal point for the feminist movement. An organization known as the Rational Dress Society began to form. They argued that women's clothing was unhealthy and restrictive. They pushed for clothing that was functional, demanding that women have the same utility in their clothing as men. This culminated in the early 20th century with the suffragette suit, a practical outfit featuring multiple large pockets, allowing women to carry newspapers and flyers for their political campaigns without needing a handbag. So, where does that leave us today? Interestingly, the pocket gap still exists. While men's clothing is almost entirely utility-focused, women's pockets are often decorative, sewn shut, or simply too small to hold a smartphone. Much of this is driven by fast fashion, where cutting out pocket construction saves time and fabric costs. Furthermore, there is a persistent belief in the fashion industry that adding pockets adds bulk to the hips, ruining the line of the clothes. Therefore, designers frequently prioritize the aesthetic of the garment, sacrificing practicality in the process. So, the next time you reach for your keys or phone, take a moment to consider the long, complex history woven into that small fabric pouch.
That is the end of part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers.